Mossad and the birth of Israel. Where are you watching from? Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because what you are about to hear is a story of shadows, courage, and the unseen hands that shaped a nation. When the smoke of World War II finally cleared, Europe lay in ruins. But from the ashes rose a people determined to carve their place in history. Among them were Jewish survivors, displaced and hunted for years. Now searching for a homeland, a place they would call Israel. Yet, what few knew then was that their struggle was not only fought on battlefields, but also in the secret corridors of intelligence and deception. Before Israel even became a state, secret groups like Haganah, Irgun, El-Li were already working under the radar, smuggling weapons through Europe's shattered cities, hiding under false names, and communicating through coded messages. It was within these covert networks that the early seeds of Mossad were planted, not as an official agency, but as an underground movement of men and women who understood that information could win wars long before armies ever marched. In the dark alleys of post-war Europe, agents gathered blueprints of abandoned British depots, intercepted military shipments, and built silent alliances with sympathetic officers. Ships filled with refugees sailed under false identities toward Palestine, while others carried weapons hidden beneath crates of medicine. It was a war of silence. No flags, no uniforms, only whispers in the night. By 1947, as tension rose in the Middle East, these secret networks became Israel's invisible shield. When the United Nations voted for the partition of Palestine, chaos erupted. The Arab nations prepared for war. But Israel's underground intelligence had already mapped out supply routes, intercepted radio traffic, and predicted attacks before they came. It was espionage that gave the newborn state its first breath of survival. When Israel declared independence in 1948, it faced invasion from every side. Yet behind the front lines, a hidden force worked tirelessly, the same men and women who would later form Mossad. Their mission was simple: to gather information faster than the enemy could act. They intercepted coded telegrams, sabotaged communication lines, and secured foreign aid through secret diplomatic channels. In many ways, the intelligence war decided the outcome before the guns did. And when the smoke cleared once again, Israel had survived. Out of that victory, Mossad was born, not as a tool of aggression, but as a guardian built from necessity, shaped by struggle, and tested in silence. Its first generation came not from spy schools or academies, but from refugee camps, battlefronts, and secret hideouts, ordinary people who had lived through extraordinary times. This was the Hidden War, fought not in daylight, but in the long shadows of history. And this was only the beginning, because the next chapter would see Mossad emerge on the world stage, where every move, every mission, and every secret would shape the balance of the Middle East. The Suez Crisis, when the guns fell silent after Israel's birth, the young nation stood surrounded by uncertainty. Its borders were thin lines drawn in sand, its enemies many, and its survival still a daily question. But within the walls of Tel Aviv, Mossad had begun to rise quietly, methodically building a network that reached far beyond the desert. This was the mid-1950s, and the world had entered a new era, a world divided not by geography, but by power. On one side stood the Western Bloc, led by Britain, France, and the United States. On the other, the Soviet Union, feeding the growing influence of Egypt under its young, charismatic leader Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser had become a symbol of Arab nationalism, uniting the region with one promise to stand against Israel. But Israel's intelligence services saw the storm before it came. Through hidden channels and secret operatives across Cairo and Alexandria, Mossad reported that Egypt was buying Soviet weapons in large numbers, tanks, aircraft, and missiles, all flowing into Egyptian ports. And when Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal in July 1956, he not only took control of one of the world's most vital trade routes, but also ignited a geopolitical firestorm. In a quiet room in Paris, away from the world's eyes, A secret meeting took place between Israeli, British, and French officials. The plan was simple but dangerous. Israel would strike first, advancing into Sinai. Britain and France would then intervene to restore peace, but in truth, it was to reclaim the Suez Canal. This was Operation Musketeer, born in silence, planned in shadows. As Israel prepared for war, Mossad's role became critical. It supplied British and French intelligence with detailed maps of Egyptian defenses, airfields, and command posts, data collected through covert reconnaissance and informants who risked everything. Mossad also ensured that key communication lines inside Egypt were disrupted the moment the operation began, leaving the Egyptian command blind in the early hours of battle. On October 29, 1956, Israeli paratroopers landed deep inside the Sinai Peninsula. Within hours, Israeli forces advanced with precision that stunned even their allies. Mossad's intelligence had been exact. Every airfield, every convoy route was known in advance. For the first time, the world saw a glimpse of what Israel's intelligence network could truly achieve. But what followed surprised everyone, not on the battlefield, but in politics. Under pressure from the United States and the United Nations, Britain and France were forced to withdraw. The operation succeeded militarily, yet failed diplomatically. The canal remained under Egyptian control. However, for Israel, something much greater had been gained recognition. The world had witnessed a small nation's ability to act with speed, coordination, and unmatched intelligence. Inside Mossad, lessons from the Suez operation became doctrine. They learned that intelligence was not just about knowing the enemy, it was about predicting the future. The agency began expanding globally, building secret relationships in Europe, Africa, and Asia. New divisions were formed, one to gather intelligence abroad, one to conduct covert operations, and one to manage secret diplomacy. The Suez Crisis marked the first time Mossad's influence reached far beyond Israel's borders. It was not just a participant in war, it had become an architect of strategy, a hidden power behind the scenes. And though the world moved on, Mossad had already set its eyes on a new and darker challenge: the rise of German scientists working for Egypt, and a dangerous race to prevent a new kind of weapon from ever reaching Israeli soil. The shadow raced. The year was 1960. And the silence over the Middle East hid a race unlike any other. A race not for land, but for the skies. Egypt, under President Gamal Abdel Nasser, had begun a secret project that terrified Israel's intelligence chiefs. Deep inside Cairo's military compounds, German rocket scientists, the same minds that once built Hitler, SV-2 missiles were now working to build weapons capable of reaching Tel Aviv. For Mossad, this was not just a threat, it was a nightmare resurfacing from the ashes of the Second World War. The agency's director, Yasser Harel, understood what this meant. If Egypt succeeded, the balance of power in the Middle East would shift forever. And so began one of the most daring and secretive operations in Mossad's history: an invisible war, fought not with tanks or planes, but with deception, fear, and shadows. Through agents scattered across Europe, Mossad began tracing the network that brought German scientists to Egypt. In the quiet suburbs of Munich and Zurich, letters were intercepted, phone lines tapped, and mysterious packages sent. Many of these scientists believed they were working for peaceful research, until they realized they were helping build rockets aimed at Israel. Then, the warnings began. Some received anonymous letters bearing chilling words: "You cannot escape the past." Others found their homes under surveillance. Their families followed. The message was clear. Mossad knew who they were, where they lived, and what they were building. But this campaign of psychological warfare was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, Mossad's European operatives, under Harel's command, launched Operation Damocles, a covert effort to stop the German rocket program by any means short of open war. Key suppliers were intimidated into cutting ties. Shipments of specialized components vanished before reaching Egypt, and middlemen who facilitated the contracts suddenly disappeared from the scene. In one case, a German engineer working in Cairo received a small parcel. Inside, a book, The Future of the Rocket. When he opened it, a small explosive hidden within detonated, leaving no trace of who sent it or how. It was a message to all who participated in Nasser's secret project. The past would not remain buried. At the same time, Israel turned to diplomacy. Mossad quietly shared intelligence with West German officials, exposing the involvement of their citizens in Egypt's weapons program. This led to immense pressure in Bonn, forcing the government to take public action. Many scientists withdrew, fearing for their safety and their reputations. The project began to crumble. By 1963, the rocket program had slowed dramatically. Mossad's combination of intimidation, sabotage, and intelligence leaks had achieved what armies could not, stopping a threat before it was born, yet the cost was high. The campaign strained Israel's relations with Germany and forced Mossad to walk a thin line between morality and survival. When Isor Harel resigned shortly after, his departure marked the end of an era. The old Mossad, driven by personal conviction and fear of history, gave way to a new Mossad, colder, more calculated, and even more formidable. The shadow race was over, but its lessons lingered. Israel had learned that its greatest battles would often be fought far from the battlefield in laboratories, in boardrooms, and in the hearts of those who chose between science and conscience. Mossad Before the Storm, The Hidden War of Spies, Part 4, The Six-Day Mirage. It was early June 1967. The Middle East stood on the edge of fire. Armies were moving, alliances were shifting, and in the corridors of Tel Aviv, Mossad's top operatives were already fighting a silent war long before the first tank crossed the border. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan had joined hands, their leaders confident that Israel would be crushed within days. Nasser's speeches echoed across radios, a storm of pride and defiance, while Israeli pilots checked their planes under the rising sun. But the true battlefield was invisible. It lay in coded messages, intercepted transmissions, and whispers traded in cafes from Amman to Damascus. Weeks before the war began, Mossad's European stations had picked up subtle clues: the sudden movement of Soviet advisors in Egypt, secret convoys heading toward Sinai, and troop buildup hidden behind diplomatic cover. Using its deep network of informants, Mossad built a picture of an approaching war. Yet, what made this conflict different was not just the preparation, but the precision of information. Israel knew not only that an attack was coming, but exactly when and from where. In Cairo, Mossad's agents operated under false identities: businessmen, journalists, and aid workers. They fed back coded reports that revealed Egyptian troop positions and the locations of airfields. One report carried a simple phrase: "The birds will not fly early." It was the confirmation that Egypt's Air Force would not strike first, an opening Israel needed. Back in Tel Aviv, Mossad's intelligence briefings reached the Prime Minister's table. The decision was made: Israel would strike first. Operation Focus, a lightning assault on enemy airbases, was planned with chilling precision. When dawn broke on June 5, 1967, Israeli jets roared into the skies. Flying low over the Mediterranean to avoid radar, within hours, the Egyptian Air Force was shattered before it could even take off. Mossad's intelligence had been perfect: every target, every runway, every aircraft accounted for. By the end of 6 days, Israel had achieved the unthinkable. The Sinai, Golan Heights, West Bank, and East Jerusalem were under its control. The entire map of the Middle East had been redrawn. Yet behind this stunning victory was the quiet, unseen work of Mossad, the agency that had prepared the battlefield long before the first bullet was fired. But the victory came with a warning. Mossad analysts realized that such dominance would invite new enemies, deeper conspiracies, and even deadlier alliances. The world's intelligence networks had now turned their eyes toward Israel, some in admiration, others in fear. The Six-Day War became not only a military triumph, but an intelligence masterpiece, a war won by information before it was won by fire. The Munich Aftermath. The year was 1972. The world had gathered in Munich for the Olympic Games, a symbol of peace after decades of war. But beneath the bright stadium lights, a storm of revenge and fear was already brewing. Mossad, Israel's shadow agency, was about to enter one of the darkest and most secretive chapters in its history. In the early hours of that September morning, as athletes slept in the Olympic Village, a small group of armed men climbed the fence. What happened next shook the entire world, an act of terror that would echo across generations. For Israel, it was not just an attack on its athletes, it was an attack on its very existence. Within days, the message was clear in Tel Aviv: silence was no longer an option. A covert order was issued, one that would change the course of intelligence warfare forever. Mossad would strike back, not with open war, but with the precision of shadows. The operation had a name whispered only in sealed rooms: Wrath of God. Teams of operatives spread across Europe, Rome, Paris, Athens, and beyond. Their faces changed with every border crossed, their names rewritten with every mission. The mission was not about vengeance alone. It was about deterrence, about sending a silent message to every network that dared threaten Israel again. Each target was tracked with months of observation. Some were found in quiet cafes, others in safe houses hidden behind false walls. Mossad's methods were cold, clinical, and unseen. Not a declaration of war, but a warning written in silence. Yet, within the agency, doubts began to grow. Could justice delivered in darkness ever be truly just? Could a state built on survival afford to carry such secrets? In the years that followed, European governments tightened their watch, and intelligence agencies from East and West began quietly tracing Mossad's movements. But the operatives remained one step ahead, protected by layers of misinformation, forged passports, and untraceable routes. By the late 1970s, the operation was drawing to a close. Most of the targets had vanished from Mossad's list, and Israel turned its focus back to rising tensions in Lebanon. But inside the agency's archives, one question still haunted them: had they ended the cycle or merely prolonged it? The Munich aftermath had changed Mossad forever. No longer was it just an agency of defense. It had become an invisible hand, shaping the world's unseen wars. And in the quiet corners of Europe, whispers of its reach continued to grow. Mossad's silent decades, the 1980s, opened with a quiet unease across the Middle East. The war drums had faded. But beneath the silence, intelligence networks were locked in a new kind of conflict, invisible, methodical, and far more complex than open battlefields. For Mossad, the lessons of Munich were carved deep into its doctrine. Now, its mission was not retaliation, but preemption, to strike threats before they could rise. In the smoky streets of Beirut, Mossad's agents operated under the cover of chaos. Lebanon was tearing itself apart in civil war, and the city had become a playground for spies. CIA informants, KGB operatives, Arab League contacts, and shadowy freelancers, all circling one another like hunters in fog. Mossad's task was clear: to monitor, to prevent, and to protect Israeli borders from the storms gathering just beyond them. One of Mossad's most daring missions in those years unfolded under a false identity operation that lasted nearly half a decade. An agent embedded deep inside hostile networks, sending fragmented intelligence back to Tel Aviv: names, movements, shipments, conversations whispered between warlords. Every fragment was a puzzle piece in a picture of survival. But Mossad wasn't alone in the game. Across the region, other agencies were evolving. The CIA's reach expanded. The Soviets armed their allies, and new regional agencies began asserting their influence. Information became the most valuable weapon, and deception its deadliest form. Mossad learned to move not through power, but through patience. Then came 1982, the Lebanon invasion. The operation was swift but brutal in its politics. Amid the shifting alliances and the city's fragmentation, Mossad coordinated intelligence networks that guided Israeli forces. intercepted communications, and identified key figures in a war that was as much about control as about territory. Yet even as victories were claimed, questions grew. How far could an agency go to secure a nation without losing its moral compass? The answers, perhaps, lay not in Lebanon, but in the quiet laboratories and underground bunkers where the next era of warfare was already beginning. By the 1990s, the world had changed. The Cold War had ended. Technology, once a tool of the few, became the weapon of all. Mossad adapted faster than most satellites, digital networks, signal interceptions. The battlefield had shifted to cyberspace. Then came 1991, the Gulf War. While missiles streaked across the night sky, Mossad was already at work behind the scenes, tracing supply routes, decoding weapon origins, and warning allies before the storm. Israel's restraint during the attacks, guided by precise intelligence, prevented a wider war. But it also marked a turning point. The agency's eyes now looked far beyond its borders. By the early 2000s, Mossad had evolved into one of the world's most sophisticated intelligence organizations. Its reach spanned continents, from the markets of Istanbul to the quiet streets of Vienna. New threats had emerged: cyber warfare, covert nuclear ambitions, and shadow groups operating beyond national flags. In this new age, information was no longer just power, it was survival itself. Operations that once took years of planning could now unfold in minutes through data, drones, and digital infiltration. Mossad's greatest challenge was no longer to find the enemy, but to recognize it amid a web of deception that stretched across the globe. Yet even in this modern age of satellites and surveillance, Mossad's foundation remained the same: the agent on the ground. The human intelligence, the whisper in a crowded market that no machine could replicate. By the time the 2010s arrived, Israel's silent wars had become the stuff of modern legend. Some missions were known only by fragments: a sudden blackout in a foreign city, a shipment gone missing, a network quietly dismantled before it could strike. Mossad had become less a name and more a presence, a symbol of invisible control in a world of uncertainty. But the agency itself had changed. The newer generation, shaped by both tradition and technology, began questioning the ethics of endless secrecy. Could the line between protection and power ever truly be drawn? Inside Mossad's headquarters, the walls still carried the weight of 7 decades, the triumphs and the regrets, the victories written in silence and the losses buried under secrecy. Every file told a story. Every mission was a ghost of the one before it. And so, as the modern world steps deeper into an age of information wars, one truth remains: that intelligence, like history, is never clean. It's a story of shadows, choices, and the quiet men and women who guard nations from dangers unseen. This is the end of the Hidden War of Spies series, a Spy World story production. If you've journeyed this far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true espionage stories from the shadows of history. The final chapter of the Hidden War of Spies, the night, was silent over Tel Aviv, but inside the Mossad headquarters, the hum of secret operations still echoed. Every screen flickered with encrypted transmissions, ghosts of information moving faster than bullets. The War of Nations had long ended, but the Hidden War of Spies never truly stopped. From Damascus to Tehran, from Cairo to Beirut, shadows of Mossad's past whispered through the alleys of the Middle East. After years of conflict and invisible victories, the Israeli intelligence network had woven itself into the deepest layers of regional power. What began as a struggle for survival had transformed into a doctrine that saw intelligence as the first and last weapon. The spies of Mossad didn't fight with rifles. They fought with silence, deception, and knowledge sharper than any blade. When the 6-day war was fought, Mossad's invisible hand had already drawn the map of victory long before tanks rolled through Sinai. And when the Yom Kippur War erupted, it was not only soldiers on the ground who battled. It was the unseen watchers in dimly lit rooms, decoding every whisper that came from enemy lines. Even in defeat, they learned. even in silence, they struck back. The operations that followed from Entebbe to Operation Diamond, where an Iraqi MiG was stolen from the sky, to the countless covert missions across Europe and the Arab world, built a legend that no army could erase. Mossad became not just an agency, but a shadow empire, feared and studied by allies and adversaries alike. Yet, within this power, there lay a paradox. The more invisible the war became, the more uncertain its victories were. Each mission left behind questions. How far could a nation go to secure its future? And at what cost does secrecy become a burden to its soul? By the dawn of the 21st century, the rules of espionage had changed. Satellites replaced spies, algorithms replaced informants, and digital footprints became the new battleground. But even in this new era, Mossad adapted. In cyber corridors and encrypted webs, the ghosts of its agents still walked. Unseen but always present, defending, attacking, and surviving. In the end, the story of Israel's wars from open deserts to hidden files was not only written with weapons, but with minds. Minds that dared to see beyond borders, beyond fear. And though history will never fully reveal their names, their impact remains carved in the silence of peace that followed. The hidden war of spies never truly ends. It only changes its face, its language, its tools. The desert winds may have calmed, but the unseen watchers remain, eyes open beneath the veil of the night. Thank you for watching this series, The Hidden War of Spies. If you've journeyed through every battle, every secret, and every shadow with us, your support means everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Hour of War for more stories of history's unseen battles. Until the next hour of war, farewell, soldier of truth.